Kay emailed us and asked, I've been watching Steve Spangler since he hosted News for Kids on
That's
Channel
a
4.
long time ago.
My question is about his clothes. I think it's great that he doesn't wear a traditional lab coat like every other science guy, and I'm wondering why you chose to be different.
I was going to wear the lab coat today. I should have worn the lab coat.
Occasionally you'll wear one.
Only if I know I'm going to get wet. Yeah, for a bit. You're absolutely right. This was like News for Kids was a program earlier on with Channel 4, and it was Denver's first nationally syndicated program. And it wasn't a science program, but it was kind of like a Dateline for kids, and there was a small segment on it every week called Wonder Why, and that was mine. And I didn't know anything about it, and so I found a gentleman that I wanted to kind of emulate, and his name is Don Herbert, the original Mr. Wizard. I found him in California, contacted him, talked to him, and just said, I got this gig, and I'm just wondering if you could give me any advice. And I remember very clearly him saying, don't let them put you in a lab coat if you don't want to be in a lab coat. And I said, well, why is that? And he says, do you notice all the Mr. Wizards? He says, I'm not in a lab coat. He says, it was a sweater. He says, it was a garage, not a lab. It was common household materials, not a...
More approachable?
Exactly right. He says, because kids sometimes will look at this and maybe they don't want to be the scientist in the lab coat and the goofy bow tie and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that persona and that bit, but I chose from a very early point not to do that and just kind of wear what I wear and so forth. And sometimes weird to see a science guy wearing a suit or a shirt or whatever it is because you kind of think of him in a lab coat, but it was a very conscious decision. That's a very good question.
That is a good question.
Very good question. Very much.
Alan Peacock from Berthoud says, Mr. Spangler, why don't you use your appearances to teach? You show how to produce attention-getting results, but they rarely explain why they are happening. You come in as a magician, not a teacher. Now, first of all, you talked about this a little bit, but we want to get into your background because many people don't know. You do come from a family of magicians.
Professional magicians, absolutely.
Your parents have been performing?
You've been out to the house to kind of see this whole thing and see what that disease really looks like, right? I mean, when you go into their basement, it looks like a toy store, doesn't it? Yeah. Came from a family of professional magicians. Bruce Spangler is my father, and Bruce and Kitty. My earliest recollection, believe it or not, is watching my dad from the Paramount Theater downtown, peeking behind the curtain, watching him cut Mom into 3 pieces, and
that's normal.
Then the social worker came to the house. But then I took my dad ate fire, so the closing thing was the orchestra was there, and he would eat fire. And that was the coolest thing. When you're 4 years old, 3 or 4, and your dad eats fire, you win. So I grew up in the Denver Public Schools for the first 7 years, and I took my dad to show and tell. Imagine what would happen today if you took your dad to show and tell and he ate fire for the kids. You know, you'd have 3 news trucks outside.
And the fire departments and everybody else.
Yeah.
All at the same time.
So I did. And I love doing magic, but I don't do magic as a living. I just really love that as a hobby. But what I did learn from magicians is that a magician is able to grab somebody's attention and say, here, watch this. Watch this. And you watch. And that's what a teacher needs to be able to do. Where a teacher goes further is to be able to say, okay, now I'll show you how it works. The water didn't really vanish. It's called surface tension. And it's right there. And maybe this is where the viewer's question comes from, because maybe it looks like what we do here sometimes is just magic. It's hard in 3 or 3.5 minutes. So that's why we use, and I'm so thankful for 9news.com, because we use that resource to be able to put the real science that's out there. So I invite our viewer to, and all of our viewers, that if they want to know more science behind it, we're having some fun here, and hopefully we got your attention, and whether it's 6 a.m. or during the 4 o'clock or whatever. But there's a ton of information. We have over 300 experiments, and we're not talking just like here's a write-up and here's a quick little explanation. These are long, drawn-out kind of explanations. So if you really want to delve into it, you can. But I think that's a great suggestion. I mean, if we had a little bit more time, or maybe cut to the chase a little bit more. But if you're seeing the magic coming through, you see it. So.
And that also brings us kind of the second part of that question, because many people don't realize that you did work as a teacher in Cherry Creek. You kind of touched on that, and you also have talked to me a lot about this, that it is so important that we teach science to our kids, and the teachers be celebrated that way.
Exactly. It's sad for me to say this, and I tell teachers this all over the country, but if we continue on the path that we're on, present company excluded, we'll effectively eliminate science education at the elementary level in 5 years in some places in this country.
Right.
It has become, and if you don't believe me, just look around, it's become an extracurricular activity in so many places. I can't tell you how much our phone rings in April and May because our state testing is over and it's time to do science.
Right.
I didn't know that you just waited to do science until all the other important things were over and you do this. the most successful programs I've seen all across the country are the integrated programs, where you teach science and reading and math and all these things as an integrated approach. So it's not just, okay, kids, it's science time, and then you go and do science time. So I think it's so important, but I think that our kids have to be able to answer questions. And one of the things that I think we struggle with is kids leaving elementary school being able to wonder, discover, explore, and ask a question.
Right.
They can't do that. I don't know any jobs out there where the kids are going to sit there and wait and raise their hand and wait for their boss to come by and give them another worksheet. I mean, it's not going to happen. So we have to have a point where kids are able to ask a question, to come up with some sort of experimental process. And you may not be doing a lab experiment for your living, but you're going to have to be a critical thinker.
And that wonder is really in the elementary school age, don't you think? Where they're not afraid to express the wonder?
No, and if you don't stifle it at this point, it will really grow. And the research that's out there, National Science Foundation has some wonderful research that said that if they have 3 positive science experiences before they get out of elementary school, the likelihood of them taking an upper-level science course in either middle school or high school jumps drastically. It's all part of the NSF indicators. And so, yeah, part of the fun is, and part of the point is to get kids excited, but the other part is to get them hooked, to get them so they look at it and say, I get this, and I want to explore a little bit more. We're giving them a tool to just be able to express themselves and to come up with an answer. It was Bill Gates that said the number 1 import in the United States is genius. You know, when he says we don't have to hire any more Americans because we don't, that all this talent is coming from outside. That's kind of like a wake-up call. That's a Sputnik for our generation.
It should be to all of us to change that.
We have to teach it. And so many Colorado teachers are doing such a great job. It's hard. It's hard.
I know. We have to say thank you to them more often, right? All
absolutely.
the time. Brian Olson from Highlands Ranch writes, I sure wish I would have had a science teacher like you when I was in school. American students have been well behind their counterparts, as we talked about, in so many other nations in math and science. If you could sit down with President Obama and Governor Ritter, what would you recommend be done? Right now, the response seems to be throwing money, not ideas, at solving this growing problem.
That's a really, really good question. Because, I mean, without being political, it does seem like that if we put money into a program, I guess it'll just kind of fix it. And I know that that's not the overall intention. The number one thing that I see is that teachers aren't, in the world that, at least that I'm working in, they're not saying, I can't teach science because I don't have the materials. They're saying, I'm having a tough time because I don't maybe have the proper training. If we could take the money and put that into professional staff development, professional growth in those areas, content, so it's not just learning how to teach, but actually having an expertise in that particular content area, making them more comfortable with it, especially at the elementary level. And I work so much in early childhood and elementary that we really start to focus on that content later on in middle school and high school. But at that elementary level, if we can get them hooked, I can't think of a middle school science teacher or a high school science teacher that wouldn't thank an elementary teacher for saying, thanks for preparing them, having all those concepts that they need so that we can really take them to that new level. So professional staff growth and training.
And I know you've mentioned before, if a teacher demonstrates it or does it in front of a class, especially at the elementary level, you'll be amazed at how the kids will respond at the science fair or whatever it might be.
Right. And it's training teachers to go past the gee whiz. The other thing that Don Herbert taught me, and Mr. Wizard, is he said, don't let the gee whiz overtake the content. And that goes back to our earlier viewer's question. We have to be very, very careful that it's not magic. Magic, there's a different venue for that. But if I can grab their attention and use that technique that a magician would use and then deliver some really great content or turn them over to the people who can deliver them to the great content, that's a tag team that you just can't beat.
Thank you, Steve, for answering all of our viewers' questions. We get a lot of the questions about you on a regular basis when people bump into us and talk about it, because you have made science fun and interesting and engaging. It's a good lesson for all of us. You never stop learning, right?
Never stop. Is this fire retardant? Is everything okay? We're going to be fine.
We're going to get out of here.
Okay, we're out.
Thank you.
Thank you.